Subdivision, CrossRoad Chaffar XPN 150006.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, Heather Kelly with the Planning Division. The application for CrossRoad Chaffar is a request by Lorenzi Dodds and Ganil on behalf of the applicant, Smith Point LLC, for approval to subdivide 27 lots intended for single-family detached homes using cluster subdivision design criteria. This project, as we just discussed, is located to the west of the Ironsides Estate subdivision. It's going to be accessed off of a public road off of Maryland Route 425. The property is located within Growth Tier 4 per the Charles County Tier Map. The application for the preliminary subdivision plan was submitted to the Planning Division on November 6, 2015, and received 3 staff reviews that included state agencies such as the Health Department, Soil Conservation District, and State Highway Administration, and county departments such as Public Works and Planning and Growth Management. A technical review committee was held with the applicant and commenting agencies on June 15, 2016. Staff of the Resource and Infrastructure Management Division will now present findings for adequacy of public facilities.
Okay, since you didn't mention my name, I'm going to have to do it.
Mr. John Mudd, Resource Manager, Resource and Infrastructure Management.
You're too kind. Under the category of roads, as we talked about briefly ago, a new traffic impact study was prepared for this project. It studied the 2 intersections we denoted at 425 and DeMatha Court, as well as 425 and Maryland Route 6. The results of that current study, which included the 21 lots for the project that was just approved, demonstrated that the intersections will operate with reserved capacity for the key movements in both the AM and PM peak hours. One additional item is that the road length of Maryland Route 425 between the 2 intersections was measured and found that the impact of the project would be very minimal, with the vehicle to capacity ratio of 0.07, with 0.80 being the upper limit that we try to feed into a roadway. So that's very, very low. Therefore, the road impact analysis shows that there is no adverse impact to roadways from the project. With regard to fire suppression, again, the project is within the 4-mile round-trip driving distance to the approved water source known as the Stinetz Gravel Pit on Port Tobacco Road. Groundwater supply will be satisfied through the issuance of MDE groundwater appropriation permits, and upon approval of this plan, the project would be added to the school allocation waiting list as a new project. The same will hold true in terms of the Section 75 provisions. Again, because the project has frontage on purely state highways, the 3 provisions, Section 75A, B, and C, are not applicable in this case. And again, we already denoted that there will be a deceleration lane built on 425 to aid in the access to DeMatha Court. Secondary point of access is not required because the project, in concert with the first project just approved, shall not create more than 1,000 vehicle trips per day. Therefore, staff has found that the proposed preliminary subdivision plan will not adversely affect the adequacy of public facilities serving the area, project, or development as specified in Article 16 of the Charles County Zoning Ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. Mudd. In addition, forest conservation, open space, and recreational amenities were reviewed for consistency with applicable ordinances, specifically the Forest Conservation Ordinance, the Charles County Zoning Ordinance, and the Charles County Subdivision Regulations. An analysis of compliance with the superior design criteria has been provided to the Planning Commission in the staff report. The use of panhandle lots and irregularly shaped lots were evaluated for consistency with the criteria of the zoning ordinance and the subdivision regulations. A concept stormwater management plan was approved for the site in accordance with environmental site design to the maximum extent practicable. The applicant completed a Phase 1 archaeological investigation and submitted a report which was reviewed by the county's contract archaeologist. The report recommended further Phase 2 testing of 2 archaeological sites, and the county's contract archaeologist concurred. At their regularly scheduled meeting on July 18, 2016, the Historic Preservation Commission voted unanimously to approve staff recommendations for a specific condition of preliminary plan approval that states no further plat approval, issuance of development services permits, or ground disturbance shall take place on Crossroads Court prior to a Phase 2 archaeological investigation on lots 20, 23, and 24. In conclusion, based on the analysis and findings contained in the staff report and to address the mitigation of impacts, staff recommends approval of the preliminary subdivision plan subject to the 6 conditions noted within the staff report. This concludes our presentation at this time.
Questions, comments for staff?
I just have a question under the community planning recommendation about no further plat approval until the Phase 2 archaeological investigation. So do we have a date or at least a time frame on when that will be completed, or no status report at all?
That would be pretty hard to predict at this juncture, but the point of the condition is to ensure that a record plat could not proceed until such time as that second level phase review has been completed. So that should certainly protect the topic at hand. But in terms of a time frame, I think that would be very difficult to even guesstimate at this point.
Okay. So it could be a very long time before we see anything happening.
It's hard to say.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions, comments? Yes, I'm sorry, Nancy.
I've got a couple. Ms. Kelly, do you know if there has been an adequate survey for RTEs on this project?
RTEs, rare, threatened, and endangered species. I would defer to Mrs. Daly on that inquiry, if you wouldn't mind.
There she can sit here.
Good evening, Amy Daly with the Department of Planning, Growth Management, Environmental Planning. What we require for each of our subdivisions is a review letter by the Department of Natural Resources, Wildlife and Heritage Service, and that review was conducted, and their letter came back stating they had no records. We have nothing in our code that actually requires a survey to take place for each subdivision.
Well, I know we have nothing requiring it. I was just wondering if, because it's such a sensitive area, if the applicant had looked.
There was nothing in the letter to even suggest that an assessment was required.
Okay. I'm also very concerned about the Tier 2 water, that we're talking about 2 crossings, one which is pretty substantial, connecting the 2 properties. And I know that it needs additional protections, but there wasn't a whole lot in the review about that. I mean, is the county okay with it?
The county extends the resource protection zone to the extent of the Tier 2 buffer, but the actual application of the buffer in terms of how deep it needs to be is required by the Maryland Department of the Environment Science Services Administration. And that will happen at the time that the applicant actually applies for permits to do the crossing. What we have in our ordinance is simply the extension of our resource protection zone to add that layer to the Tier 2 buffer. But there's someone at MDE that takes care of that review, and we don't actually have a specific code for that. So we basically work with Ms. Valdez at the Maryland Department of the Environment, and through the permitting process, that happens.
So it's MDE that approves 2 crossings through a Tier 2 stream.
The Maryland Department of the Environment approves all crossings through jurisdictional waters, and as a part of that review, because it's been designated as being within a watershed of a Tier 2 water, the Science Services Administration section of MDE will get involved with that review, and as they go through that review process, she will apply the buffer. We have preliminarily shown it because it's a preliminary plan, and we've been working with the developer to basically acknowledge that it's there. And it's on page 3 of 14, we mentioned that that's a habitat protection measure. And when the permits come through for the county, we'll make sure, number one, that they have the state permit, that the coordination has taken place, and then we will review for requirements under the resource protection zone.
Okay. Are there requirements like there are for the RPZ that you, I guess it is the RPZ, that you try and make the crossing as perpendicular as possible?
That's correct. That's why we've extended the resource protection zone to encompass that buffer to allow that protection to extend as well.
Okay. I have another question, and it's probably not for you, Ms. Daly.
Okay.
My concern is you guys sent us the septic application, the PERT application form, and then the Department of Health's sewage easement plats for this property. Now, as we know, there are 3 criteria to be exempt from to be grandfathered from the provisions of SB 236. One of them is, I'm sorry. Oh, my goodness. Mr. Chair, can I just take a second because I don't have
Sure.
that in front of me? Anybody else has questions?
Any other questions for people while we're waiting for Mrs. Schertler to find what she's looking for?
Well, I'll wing it. Basically, you have to have a PERC application in for all of the lots on the parcel. And then within 18 months of the approval by the health department, you have to have the preliminary plan submitted. Well, the documents you've given us show that the PERC test on-site application was for 22 lots. So the application was not for all of the lots in this subdivision. And then the dates on the sewage easement plats are January 2014, and the preliminary subdivision plan is past the 18-month deadline. So there are 2 of the 3 criteria to be grandfathered from SB 236, and it doesn't look like this project has met them. The 3rd criteria being it needs to be approved before October 1st.
Can I just inquire real briefly? I'll defer to Ms. Daly on the number of lots, but I just want to verify because the sewage easement plats, from what we understand from the health department, are very close to approval. They're awaiting, I guess, approval of a groundwater appropriation permit, but these plats have not had the final signature. And I believe, and Mr. Rice is here, he can correct me if I'm wrong, that we did a memo regarding this and discussed that the final approval of a percolation test would be the approval of the sewage easement plat, and talked about all the steps that go into that. So if the approval of the sewage easement plat hasn't occurred yet, then we're not within that 18, we're not breaking the 18-month requirement, I guess. So he might want to come up here and speak to that, but I think I said what I was supposed to say. So
Wait a minute. So are you saying, because I'm looking at the sewage easement plat stamped by the county, you're saying that's not the approval?
the sewage easement plat stamped by the county in what fashion?
It says sewage easement plat number 1 and sewage easement plat number 2
Okay.
for CrossRoad Chaffar. And the date on this is January 2014. That's the documents you gave us.
Right, and it's not signed by the health department because they haven't been signed by the health department yet. The health department has not issued their final approval of the sewage easement plats.
Well, then they can't submit the plan. You can't have it both ways. You can't say, once we've had these sent in and they've done the PERC tests, that we've met that criteria.
But that's the standard being used, is that the sewage easement plat is the approval of the percolation.
Right.
And the applications that you were provided in your packet there were 3 different ones, and they all refer to the same parent parcel. There's one for 6 lots, there's one for 29 lots, and then another one for 22. And what we're dealing with are 2 parcels that were interconnected under similar ownership, so the percolation applications were filed at the same time. And the applicant might be able to elaborate on that. But that other criteria you mentioned, we've given you 3 applications.
Right, but 2 of them were from 2004,
Which is
and
prior
they
to
were not for
2012.
this parcel. The one that was for parcel 145 was the one that was submitted 6/20/2012. And so for this parcel to be exempt from the requirements of SB 230, grandfathered from the requirements of SB 236, the application for the perk test shall be for all of the lots, and this is only for 22. And even if I know that there were 3 lots that were jiggered around from the other one, but that takes us to 25. So that, and then if this perk test thing, which you gave us, which has that date, if that's when the perk tests were done and we're calling that the approval, then the application is still past the deadline because that has to be within 18 months. So it seems this application has failed to reach 2 of the 3 criteria to be grandfathered by SB 236.
I'm sorry, I just want to make sure I understand completely the stamp. I'm just in a hurry as I'm trying to look through it so I can keep up with the discussion. The stamp.
I'm looking at the sewage easement plats that you gave us.
I guess while Heather's been looking at it, we've been consistent with what we're providing you, and I don't know that in the last several subdivisions you've actually seen sewage easement plants with approval. We continue to comment that they're waiting on a groundwater appropriation permit. That's the trigger that's been used for the approval of the percolation. So this is very consistent with what you've been given.
I'm just looking at the dates don't match. And I think this is the first time I could be wrong, this is the first time I remember being given a copy of the application.
Looks like Mr. Rice wants to say a few words.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and step down.
So for the record, Charles Rice, Program Manager for Environmental Programs. There's 2 issues that I'm hearing. One is whether or not the applicant submitted the proper application to the Health Department for the number of lots that are associated with these plans. I would like Mr. Lesner to address that. I think he could probably answer that question more clearly. The second one is the question of whether or not the 18-month criteria is an issue. And I think you're looking at the dates on the sewage easement plats that are part of your package. If you refer back to the memo that we issued several months ago as to what constitutes an approved perk, it is when the Health Department signs off on those sewage easement plats, actually signs them, is when they become an effective plat and approved perks. The last piece that this project is waiting for, and is very similar to other projects, is the groundwater appropriation permit that's issued by Maryland Department of the Environment. That is still pending with Maryland Department of the Environment, so until that permit is obtained from them, the Health Department cannot sign the final sewage easement plat. So technically, the perks are not approved yet. Therefore, the 18-month criteria is not an issue.
Well, then we can't approve. Then we can't approve it if they're not approved. We can't approve the subdivision because, SB 236 says, the grandfather criteria says it has to be approved. Now, my understanding when we went through,
it doesn't say that they have to be approved. It says that one, you have to have applied for the perks by the 2012 date. And then within 18 months of having approved perks, which we do not yet, they have to have submitted their plan to the department, which they did do that.
well, if it,
So
Well, it hasn't-
you're confused.
I am confused.
I agree.
So Charles, clear this up on the 3 on-site sewage disposal site evaluation applications. One for the 6 lots dated 1/5/04. The second one for 29 lots dated 2/19/04. And the third one for, I can't read the number of lots, I think that's 22, says 6/20/12. And from what I gather from what you're saying is is that they submitted those applications in a timely fashion. Now you're waiting for it to get processed in relationship to the sewage easement plat being identified on the